Welcome to Talent Hub Talk. I'm Ben Duncan, and on this podcast, I will be interviewing prominent and inspirational figures from both the local ANZ and global Salesforce Ohana. In today's episode, I am joined by Robin Emblem. Robin is a Salesforce Solution Architect who is currently based in London, having spent a few years working in the New Zealand Salesforce market. Through the episode, we heard more about Robin's background. He actually started his career as a recruiter. So I was really interested to hear more about how he progressed from being a recruiter to working his way up to solution architecture. We look at what skills were transferable and what Robin had to learn on his journey, what his initial plans had been after moving into the Salesforce space, how and why he was given opportunities to lead engagements from quite an early stage in his Salesforce journey, some of the differences between the New Zealand and UK Salesforce markets. And then we really focus in on how he made the leap from functional consultant to solution architect, how being in the remote world through and post-COVID has impacted his progression, if at all, in that he's not been working with people day to day to learn from as he's moving into that solution architect role. And then we look at some of his goals for the future. So a really, really interesting episode, really great for people perhaps that aren't from a technical background that can take some inspiration from the journey that Robin has been on. And I hope you enjoy the episode. If you do, please do subscribe for future episodes that are coming through. So Robin, thank you very much for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you here. I guess our online relationship started when you were in New Zealand, and we've had a few conversations, but this is the first time we're speaking about your career and going in depth around how you've kind of made the transition that you've made. Really excited to hear that journey.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to tell you, I suppose, and talk about it. It doesn't happen too often, so yeah, it's a good opportunity.
Awesome. So let's look back at your, your early kind of aspirations and plans and what you wanted to do with your career before you moved into the workforce.
Yeah, I mean, very sort of younger days, I had my eyes set on being a pilot, and that was kind of really early aspirations, and that kind of floated away, and I kind of got wrapped up in I suppose being in my teenage years and my 20s, and it sort of disappeared for a bit. And my initial career was quite unstructured because I didn't go to university, and I didn't pursue further education. So I ended up kind of sort of floating around for a little bit in my formative years, and then doing a bit of traveling, which I took full advantage of and enjoyed every minute. And to be perfectly honest with you, I sort of almost fell into recruitment. It wasn't planned, and that's I suppose a tale all the time, right, in that industry. And I suppose the aspirations at that point sort of were very much focused around my role in recruitment and eventually HR. And when I started to move internally, I was looking more around kind of organizational strategy, and that's sort of in my kind of mid-20s, I started to really think about, okay, what direction does my career go in? And at that point in time, it was focused around organizational development, resource planning, and internal strategy around staffing and HR.
So for anyone that's listening that doesn't understand the recruitment industry, it's very, very common for people not to plan to be a recruiter in life.
Yes,
I think, obviously that's, I'm releasing a podcast today, and that's about my journey and how I became a Salesforce recruiter. But I didn't go to university. I definitely didn't plan to be a recruiter. And everyone I know, I think, has fallen into the industry.
Yeah.
So had IT ever been something you were interested in?
Not really. I mean, I suppose I was always kind of cognizant of the opportunities available in the world of IT. The career paths that were there, I think I was kind of loosely aware of. But I suppose given that I didn't study and I didn't, have a computer science degree, from my perspective at that point in my career, it felt really inaccessible. So whilst I was kind of cognizant of, again, the opportunities that were there and the paths that you could take, it felt like it was never something that was going to happen, really. Just given the situation that I was in with respect to my experience and my education.
So what did you recruit for?
So I started out recruiting architects, but in the construction world.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the world of buildings. That's actually how I met my partner. She's an architect, and we met at an
Oh,
industry
no
event.
way.
But I still do hold a passion for architecture. So it's a great kind of world to work in, working in the world of design, and moved slowly when I relocated to New Zealand, because I started out recruiting for architecture in London. When I relocated to New Zealand, started to move more into the world of construction and engineering, and eventually ended up working for a large global engineering organization internally as one of their sort of talent partners. And yeah, very focused around the world of buildings essentially. But it was a consultancy, it was an engineering consultancy. So there are actually quite a lot of parallels around the world that I'm in now as a Salesforce
Sure.
sort of consultant architect, and the world that I came from.
So how did you ever, like, it's not obviously like a clear, obvious
No,
path from what you were doing
no.
to then finding Salesforce and taking that interest. So was there just a moment you kind of fell over it and here you were, this was a platform in front of you that you found interesting?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you hit the nail on the head. It's very difficult to draw a tangible line from what I was doing to where I am now. But it just so happened that I was utilizing Salesforce as a tool. So the organization that I was working with, we were using Salesforce as our recruitment tool. And it was a very weird use case for Salesforce, but it was being managed by, we had a managed package called Job Science that was on there. It was all in Classic. It was hugely restrictive, lots of Visualforce pages. So it was a real bread and butter basic version of the platform that I know and build now. And I think I just got stuck with something one day and found myself on Trailhead. And it really did start from there. And I suppose that shroud of inaccessibility around the world of IT started to kind of fall down when I realized that actually I can go on and I can self teach I can self learn, and I can teach myself and go through that process. And also I'm a kind of a sucker for collecting things. So seeing that I could get badges and there were different ranks and the kind of gamification of that learning process, I suppose really talked to me. So, and that's what I started doing. And being a recruiter, I did look into, well, what are the paths? If I do take this seriously, I move in this direction as a genuine career change, because this was sort of a couple of weeks into my learning journey. Where will I end up? What will my job roles potentially look like? So I suppose I started to form kind of an understanding of the direction my career could take at that point. But yeah, it was basically going onto Trailhead, learning things, and then unfortunately for everyone listening, kind of manhandling our Salesforce instance and building things out for my boss at the time, because we didn't have a dedicated internal Salesforce resource. It was just one of the applications that the organization utilized. The IT team were across many different applications, and we basically got handed the keys to the castle. And I'm sure I did some terrible things at that very early phase, but there wasn't too much that I knew, so I couldn't break anything in earnest. But I really thoroughly enjoyed. I think the thing that spoke to me initially was that I could, see the effort that I was putting in and see it translate into change for the organization that I was working for. So, just seeing building out basic processes and basic automation, putting together reports and seeing how that would impact my colleagues and help my management as well, kind of really excited me. I thought, oh, well, actually this is something I can get my teeth into, and I can actually immediately see the change that it's making to the business around me. And from that point, it was then kind of the thinking switched, and it was like, well, okay, now I'm starting to think not just about what I've done and reports that I've built, but how many opportunities there are for this tool in my role and the role that my team are doing, and then the wider business as well. How can we interact with HR to make sure that when we're getting a hire, they're doing their provisioning for all the IT equipment before we even, make that requisition. So it started to kind of the scope and capability of what I was working with started to become clear, and I found that really exciting. And then I just had to basically make a job out of it, and that's the difficult part, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure. So, like, did they come to you and ask you to be the kind of accidental admin, I guess, in the
yeah,
team
yeah.
as part of your remit, or did you put your hand up and say, I want to give this a shot?
Yes, effectively, I spoke to my manager and said, I've been learning. I think there's some time savings we can do here around reporting, because they were pulling all of the data out of the system, putting it into Excel spreadsheets, aggregating the data, and then sending that report off to leadership. And obviously, after 5 minutes on Trailhead, I was starting to think, well, actually, we can do all of this on the platform. So it was a suggestion that I made to my boss at the time, and he was all for it, very, very supportive. Obviously cognizant that it shouldn't take up too much of my time, because it wasn't really my job. But I said, hey, I'm going to save you 5-6 hours a week. How does that sound? And
Yeah.
then it was just a conversation with the IT team to basically give me the keys to the castle and give me the rights to start changing things. And I was very cautious. I was very cognizant of the fact that I shouldn't be dealing with metadata. I should be focusing on changes to data. I don't want to really break anything entire. So it was effectively just a case of putting my hand up and speaking to someone and saying, I think we can do some cool stuff here.
Uh, and then you went into consulting, and you forged a consulting career from that point. But if we look at the skills that you had as a recruiter and the non-IT skills, I guess, what were the most transferable skills that you're able to kind of bring across?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely fundamental to me getting the role that I initially got as a junior consultant were my recruitment skills, because it's communication, confidence and communication, and those soft skills to engage with stakeholders, to get their confidence, and to elicit requirements from them in a manner that it makes sense, right? And that art of communication and understanding pain points within an organization, and how a business is structured, and how different functions of an organization work together, that is all a process that you would undertake as a recruiter. The only difference is the application of the tool to solve that problem is a new hire, as opposed to some new technologies. So the process is very much the same. It's talking to different stakeholders within an organization. Where's the gap? Where's the issue? Why does the issue exist? So all of those sort of structured lines of questioning that you go through in a kind of full scoped recruitment process, you actually have to go through anyway as part of the Salesforce process, to understand where the need for change exists. And then it's all about the application of the tool, right? And I think that was the reason that I think the initial consultancy that hired me took a chance on me, is because I demonstrated that skill set. And that there is a degree, I suppose, and perhaps not anymore, but I think there's a degree of rarity around that soft skill communications piece, and being able to understand not just the technical aspects of Salesforce, but the application of it, what the requirements are within the organization, and really mapping out those internal business structures. That's really important. And it's something you have to do in recruitment. You have to understand, does sales play well with marketing? Where do they butt heads? Where's there conflict in their internal processes? What's the culture look like of the person that I'm going to have to put into this organization? What skill sets do they need? So that process of listing kind of requirements and identifying the issues is not identical, but fundamentally the same. So I was well versed and well practiced in that, and I'd done it across large organizations and comfortable talking with people all the way through the organizational hierarchy up to C-suite. And it's a foundational set of skills that I rely on heavily today. And I think it's highly transferable. It's really important. It's in the world of consulting, or whether you're internal, because if you're internal, you've just got same set of stakeholders, a different form of engagement, maybe a different timeline of engagement as well. But it's been immeasurably helpful in my role.
So what did you struggle with?
Yeah, so unsurprisingly, it was the total lack of kind of technical background. I mean, it was coming at this role in this industry from a totally different sort of direction. So it was fundamental concepts and fundamental technical concepts. Through self-learning and through Trailhead, you can obviously get yourself to a reasonable degree of education around the system. But ultimately, there are fundamental technical concepts around looping variables, recursion, governor limits, how to avoid them, that if you don't have that baseline or background education, you have to learn. Okay. And you have to learn in context. And I think that was the fundamental difference for me, is making sure that I was learning in context. I'd done the theory. I'd obviously spent time on Trailhead, and, I'd taken my certifications. But actually the opportunity to sit with someone and to understand the application of these tools in context of a project, was really important. And early doors, that was something that I knew was going to be a challenge, and something that I knew that I had to make sure that I addressed very quickly. And it was essentially just a case of putting my hand up for every single opportunity, and learning as much as I possibly could. And I was hugely lucky, that in the first sort of 2 consultancies that I worked for, and obviously even today in my current role, I've always been supported by people that are very patient, and smarter than me. And that's what I've kind of sought those people out, to find those, to sit alongside someone and learn from them, and make sure that I'm always in that position of at least once a week I should be going, oh wow, that's a really cool concept. I'm going to put that in place in the next piece of work or project that I work on. So it was a concerted effort, and I was very cognizant that I had a lack of technical aptitude at the beginning of my career.
So, and like in terms of the actual, like getting hands-on, because I mean, like building a report, things like that, obviously there's, but when you start getting into things like flows that are a bit more technical, like with that support, was it easy enough for you to pick up, or was there something you just didn't get? Like you just really struggled for a period of time?
I think I was quite fortunate, and I did manage to pick it up relatively quickly. I think it was something that just clicked. The price. I have generally have quite a logical, process-driven approach to any problem, so it was quite natural for that for myself to apply that with the declarative tools such as Flow, but again, it was a case of I would build something out in the way that I thought was suitable. And then it was always a case of going to one of my colleagues and saying, run me through how you would do this. What's the approach that you would take? And just refining what I felt was the right approach to take. And again, putting everything in context. And I'm sure there's stuff that I would have built, 3 years ago that I'd look at now and go, what was I thinking? But fortunately, I always had people around me to kind of set me straight. But yeah, it was challenging, but it was, I really did throw myself at this learning curve. For the first, I'm still doing it now, but certainly for that first year, it was a very, very much a concerted effort to make sure that I got up to speed. And so I could marry those two skill sets together, right? And, being able to take that kind of soft skills piece, and underpin it with a good technical foundation. So yeah, it was hard work for sure, but I was surrounded by the right people.
Yeah, for sure. So you got your first cert in 2019, and you mentioned before that when you were kind of looking at Salesforce, you kind of looked to see where your career could progress. So I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was probably the admin cert.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. The famed starting point for most people in the industry. Yeah.
Yeah. So where did you, what was the plan from there? Did you always have architecture as your kind of your goal?
No, I mean, initially it was in context of what I was doing. The plan was actually very much around just working within the sphere of Salesforce at the organization I was working for. I had no kind of real intention to move out the organization I was working with and seek out work in a consultancy. I was kind of hoping to kind of build that skill set where I was, purely because I thought, well, I'm not going to be ready for consultancy. They're probably going to want people that are highly experienced in the technical aspect, probably again devaluing my own skill set around that soft piece and that understanding of business and process. So in the short term, my expectation was that I was going to be an admin, and I was going to kind of hopefully transition into that role where I was. But I just so happened to share a commute with someone that every day would get on. I would get on a ferry to get to work in Auckland. And I'd share a commute with someone that every day would be wearing some sort of Salesforce swag, right? There'd be the hat or the jumper. And it was when I was kind of in early doors engrossed in Trailhead, and eventually kind of plucked up the courage to tap him on the shoulder and say, do you work at Salesforce, or are you involved? And he just so happened to be a principal solution engineer at the Salesforce. And I kind of shared my story and said, I'm learning at the moment. I'm really interested in it. And he kind of threw the gauntlet down. There's a chap called Justin Robertson, really great mentor, actually, those early days. And he threw the gauntlet down and said, well, if you can get your admin cert, I know a really good consultancy. That was Lavabox, was the first place I worked. Said, no, really good consultancy that you can start out with, getting involved in projects and get some real good mentorship. And so that's what I did. I went away and I sort of doubled my efforts and took the cert, and then got back in contact with Justin, who put me in touch with Lavabox, and it kind of went from there, that conversation. I think they were very, again, I don't believe in luck. I think there's preparation meeting opportunity, right? So that opportunity arose, and I just so happened I'd prepared for it. And my previous background in HR and recruitment kind of fed into that, because I think the team at Lavabox saw that I was hungry to learn and I was willing to learn. And I already had this core skill set that I could apply immediately. And it kind of just went from there. And then it's gone 100 miles an hour ever since. It felt like yesterday.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And you were given, I'm not sure if it was at Lavabox but I know, having had online conversations with you before and it had some insight into the kind of engagements and projects that you worked on, you were given opportunity to lead some quite decent sized, quite complex Salesforce projects from an early stage in your journey.
Yeah.
What do you think gave your management team the confidence in? Like you said, you were learning still, right? So what was it about you that gave them the confidence to put you out on these engagements?
I think I'd been in these very large environments before, right? And I say I was used to tackling problems within big matrixed organizations with global presence and degree of internal politics here and there. And ultimately I was able to kind of spot gaps in processes and understand how people in organizations need to interact together, and what data from one departmental function might impact another. So I think it was kind of my ability at the early stages to identify that and run good discovery around those pieces. But also to kind of connect with my clients, right? I always have an aim of making a friend out of a client, because it just makes everything easier. And I'd managed to do that on a couple of these large name clients that we worked with, to build that relationship. And it did make the process of managing those projects and engaging with those people flow pretty smoothly. And I think it was the fact that we had a team around us as well, that were very technically gifted. So I was always supported there as well. I think I was also just a degree of luck there as well, that I was given those opportunities, and I suppose they had faith in me to not screw it up, essentially. And I didn't. So it was a good place to kind of start out, for sure.
Did you have confidence though, like going into your first big engagement, and because I think some of the engagements you were kind of on your own as well, dropped in to be the sole resource?
Yeah, there's been projects I've worked on where I'm kind of running it in silo, and I think I had confidence in those early days. I had confidence in the people around me, ultimately, and the support networks and structures that I had within those consultancies. And I've just been very fortunate that I've always made a point of picking cultures and environments where you are supportive of each other's work, and that's always been a big part of how I would pre-qualify an organization that I'm going to join. So there's a degree of nerves, but ultimately I think I've got the skill set, I've got the tools, the information is available to me, right? If I spend the time to understand it, and if I understand the concepts. And at at that point it was still kind of my learning journey, but I knew that I did have confidence in myself to deliver. But underpinning that was that I had a team around me that would look to support me if I got stuck, and vice versa. That's just the way we worked. So very collaborative environments. And yeah. So there wasn't a great deal of fear, bizarrely. More so now. The more I know, the more it scares me.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
So you spent a couple of years in Auckland.
Yeah.
You're from the UK originally. You've returned to the UK. So other than the fact that you now get a train to work and not a ferry,
Yeah.
what differences have you found between the ecosystems, like from a Salesforce perspective, in both locations?
From a Salesforce perspective, I mean, general, there's obviously generally cultural differences, but from the Salesforce perspective, I'd say it's just the general scale of engagement, right? It's much more typical that here we'll be working on multi-cloud projects with 4+ clouds, a larger user base. Very often that we're talking international presence, so there's more considerations that go into that. So it is generally the scale of project and the scale of delivery, and the pace of delivery is a bit keener as well. But in general, I thought this to myself the other day. I can't really pick out any fundamental differences other than the size and scale of project that you'd be working on and the clients that you're interfacing with.
And are you, because like in Australia and New Zealand, I find that, a lot of the projects you're focused on the region. So you're focused on delivering for New Zealand, right?
Yeah.
Or you're focused on delivering for Australia.
Yeah.
Do you know, like in the UK, are you typically delivering projects for European scale organizations?
Yeah, two of the recent projects that I've worked on have had transatlantic locations, and also spread across Europe as well. And that brings into play a whole kind of new realm of issues, right, that you need to solve when you've got teams delivering services in different languages, for example. It's just one aspect of the complications that can bring. So definitely that is more common. I mean, it's quite common. I'd say it's more common than not in terms of the sphere of work that I've been doing recently.
Mm-hmm. Now, you didn't start your Salesforce career that long ago,
No.
And you've progressed from like accidental admin, functional consultant, and solution architect. Now, a lot of people, and I know other people that have come from a recruitment background into Salesforce, but you're the person that stands out, has made the most progress the quickest. If you look at that functional consultant to solution architecture leap that you recently made, how did you do that? Like that's a leap that a lot of people are looking to do. And what did you need to know that you didn't know as a functional consultant?
Yeah. So I think it's becoming technically comfortable with all facets of the platform, right? And all facets of the solution. So I was, as I mentioned, very cognizant of my need to expose myself to as much as possible. And that exposure, from my perspective anyway, should never come just from theory. So I understood that learning and progressing towards certifications was an important aspect of my career development in a technical sense, but actually I need that understanding in the context of a project. So, the last few years has always been about spotting the gap in my technical skill set, putting my hand up and asking to be involved. And as part of that involvement, typically I'd be kind of, the Padawan of someone that was highly knowledgeable in those spaces. So whether that was with dealing with Salesforce Connect and an OData integration, or whether that's dealing in Service Cloud and omni-channel flows, or whatever it might be, if there's an area that I wasn't comfortable in, or that I wasn't aware of, or I hadn't used before, it was about becoming proficient. Certainly wouldn't call myself the master of anything, right? Because you're always learning, it's always changing. But becoming technically comfortable and making sure that I had on-project exposure in the core areas of work, not spreading myself too thin. There's clouds and certain solutions that I've not been involved with, and I probably won't be involved with because they're areas that don't particularly interest me, right? But in the core areas of focus that I have been working in, Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, CPQ, Community or Experience Cloud as it's called now, it was just getting the exposure. and then slowly taking on larger responsibilities in those projects. So again, it's about putting my hand up, making myself feel uncomfortable, I suppose. Always, again, with a degree of confidence, because I'd have those people around me. And then that slowly morphed. I think the last consultant I was at Gravity Lab, that kind of morphed into running my own small implementations, and then, solutioning for slightly bigger phases of larger projects, and taking the lead on a solution design for those. And that complexity kind of slowly grew. I don't think I'd have got there if I hadn't been willing to kind of put my hand up. And it's being willing is one thing. It's making those around you aware that you want to learn. That's really important, I think. And people, I think, generally kind of miss that a little bit. They expect those opportunities to kind of just come, and you'll get given the exposure. Fundamentally, I've always told people and made them aware of where I want to end up and what I want to be doing, and the development that I'm looking for. And people want to help each other. So generally, I'd be given those experiences. But it was, gaining exposure, scaling that exposure. Eventually, that morphed into running smaller implementations. Then it was running, solution design on phases of larger implementations where we're kind of shuffling resource around. Recently, it was demonstrating my technical ability. So, I developed a reusable solution that's a packaged application that we can push through and use again and again on new projects. So there was that aspect. With respect to what I wish I kind of knew before I moved into the role, I wouldn't say wish, but just preparation. I think as a consultant, as a functional consultant, you are generally focused on packages of work. So whilst you are solutioning, you're solutioning within the context of a silo, or a specific problem that you're trying to solve as part of a wider project. The holistic nature of the architect's role is something that is the immediate challenge to someone stepping into this as a new role, right? So stepping away from those individual packages of work where your responsibility is siloed, and moving towards questions like, okay, what's my environmental strategy like on this project? What deployment tool set are we going to utilize? What does the scope of the project look like? How can I protect the project within that scope through our discovery? Looking out for gotchas with respect to like third-party integrations. Where in this business's sort of flow of data are there third-party integrations to external systems that I have to consider in my solution design? And then does the future state of what they want impact that? And you're doing all of this at the same time. So it's a big change, and it is a big step, and it's a big leap. And it's something that you just get used to. I think you have to. And I complain a lot at the moment to my boss. That's how I get used to it. it's just, I kind of grumble and moan a little bit. And then eventually, like everything, right, it'll become the new norm, and it'll just start to get natural and start to feel normal. But definitely, I think just being aware of that. I mean, and you're running teams as well. We've got 5 consultants on a project that's going to last a year. We've got 5 different clouds on that project. And I've got to make sure that documentation is workable, and that everything I design is easy to be, easy to follow. And so you're spinning many different plates. And I think you can feel technically comfortable in different areas, but you've also got to make sure you can put it all together, spin every one of those plates, and then do a whole raft of other stuff on the side. So it's a different world, that's for sure. But it's enjoyable.
I wish time travel was real, because I'd like to go back and show you 3 years ago everything you just said. It would be interesting to know if you'd have thought at that point you could get to this stage within 3-4 years.
No, absolutely not. I actually, embarrassing, I think I've still got it. I wrote down kind of my goals, right, for my career when I stepped into my first junior consultant's role. Because I was into my career. Quite far into my career in the HR world, right? And it was a step backwards initially. I took quite a few steps back to move into a junior role, into a new world. But that's because I felt like there was a good opportunity, and fundamentally, I just enjoyed the work more. So I wrote down my goals, and I think I need to kind of just bed in and just cement these skill sets down now, and slow down a little bit, and Yeah, because otherwise I'll run out of road, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. One question I wanted to ask, and this is a real hot topic at the moment with like remote working and things like that, and I guess the conversation we've had, it's been centered around learning from others and leaning on others, and you know, picking up skills from other people, and that's been a kind of theme of this discussion. So has not being able to work face to face with team members been detrimental to your progress? I mean, it doesn't seem like it because you have progressed so quickly, but like taking that step from functional consultant to solution architect in a remote world must have been more difficult than if you were in an office 5 days a week with solution architect.
Absolutely. I mean, you have more time because you're eliminating commutes and stuff. So I find your time rich, and if you want that professional development, to look at things in theory, you're able to do so. I think more so than ever before. But what you miss and what's lacking again is questions in context, right? And whiteboarding together. I mean, that's how I learned a lot of my progression was based around being sat next to someone, watching what they're doing and asking questions. It's whilst you can do that over digital tools, it's a bit more disjointed, and I don't think you get into that state of flow that you can do when you're in the room with someone. But then that being said, I was like, I went through a process of before moving into this role, I was on a project with one of our senior solution architects, a lady called Priscilla Renwick, is amazing, like fantastic.
Yeah, I know
Oh,
Priscilla.
you
Yeah.
do? Right. Yeah. So I was.
She's been on the podcast before. Yeah, I met her at Dreamforce one
Yeah.
year, and she was in Sydney on holiday and came and did a face-to-face podcast just before COVID shut the world down.
Oh, right. So I was basically her understudy on a project that
awesome.
we just ran, and as you can imagine, yeah. So the mentorship that I got from that process, and just being able to witness the way that she structures projects and the way she thinks about her solutions. Was really important for me, and it was a huge piece of my development, and I'm basically mimicking that process right at the moment. So it's you can get to kind of that high level, but I think when we're talking more technical knowledge and when we're kind of learning, if you like we talked about, flow, for example, I don't think you quite get the depth of learning through Zoom as you would be if you were in that room and able to just kind of ask those fluid questions. So I think, is the lack of office time detrimental? In some areas, yes, but in other areas, I found it, equitable in essence. I haven't felt I've suffered. But I could see that if I was back where I was a couple of years ago and trying to learn flow for the first time, not being able to sort of sit next to someone and run through it and understand those concepts and little tips and tricks that you won't find in documentation, right? Funny little formulas that people have put places in variables to achieve things. That's I think going to be missing unless you're in the room with people.
Yeah, and it really it surprises me when I speak to a junior person now and they're like, oh no, I won't consider going into the office. I'm looking 100% remote, because I think if you look back at your career, you wouldn't have got to where you are now.
No, not even close.
Without that, just being embedded in a team. And like, I work remotely, right? So who am I to tell people they have to work in an office? But I do think like you do miss out on some of that learning curve if you've just not got someone to just go, can you have a quick look at this? I'm struggling. And then to sit down and grab a coffee and spend an hour talking you through that solution and why you could have done it a different way.
Yeah.
Like those kind of conversations you just miss.
I think I'm certain that I wouldn't be where I am now. And I can say that with pretty much certainty that I wouldn't be had I not had the opportunity to sit alongside people and just, the way in which people engage as well. I mean, if you're not comfortable around soft skill engagement, you need to be in the room to witness that happening to a degree, to build those skills. Technical area is one piece, but and just understanding how the process works, you need to be there. I'm sure if I'd have started my career now, I'd be saying the same thing. No, I don't want to be commuting. Why would I? But we're our own worst enemies, right? We generally have pretty short-term thinking, and I probably would have taken that short-term thinking process where if you think a bit longer term, I think you will accelerate your career and learn faster. and just have richer relationships with people by spending some time in the office. I mean, I'm all about balance, right? And I think where I work now has a perfect balance, right? You've got to be in the office 1 day a week. You can choose to be in the office more, but ultimately, it's that flexibility between the two. I think fully remote, especially as a junior, you'd struggle.
Oh, that ferry ride must have been terrible as well. I can completely understand why you would have said you wanted to work remotely full time.
I'm not joking. I think it was second month that we were living on the island. It was an island called Waiheke, just off the coast of Auckland. Second month there, I was late to work because we got waylaid by dolphins, which is a bit different to what I've usually experienced. So yeah, it was a good commute to have to struggle through every day. So it wasn't so bad.
For sure.
Yeah.
So you said you need to bed down now, but what does the future hold? Like you've ticked a lot of those goals off. I'm sure probably all of the goals that you set yourself back 3-4 year ago when you were starting out your Salesforce journey.
Yeah.
But what's next? Like where do you go from here?
Well, I mean, there are the small certifications that I've obviously got sort of ahead of me that I want to achieve. CTA is always that kind of. It's always on anyone in Salesforce probably has it on their horizon at some point, right? When I'll start that process, I don't know. I'm set, like you said, short term is all about kind of just bedding in, knuckling down, and cementing in my mind, doing the right thing. But long term, I suppose it's just broadening responsibility, and whether that's bigger teams, bigger projects, or whether that means moving into more kind of a leadership role. I think that's what I'm looking for. Again, stretching myself a bit, but yeah, at the moment it's about just learning and getting proficient and comfortable and sort of accelerating the role that I'm in terms of my skill set. But once I'm there, I think I'll start to widen things out a bit and start to maybe look at things from a more of a leadership and commercial perspective. But who knows? Who knows, right?
Nice. Well, look, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed hearing about the journey, and I think it will really inspire lots of people. So if there's anyone listening that's maybe at some stage that you have been at in the past, whether that's the accidental admin or functional consultant looking to get to solution architect, where's the best place for people to hit you up with any questions?
Probably just LinkedIn. Yeah. I'm not too big on social media outside of LinkedIn. So that's probably the best place. Just search me up, Robin Emblem, on LinkedIn. I've got a much more professional looking picture than you'll see here, but it was some years ago now.
Well, thank you so much, and all the best for whatever does come next.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Talent Hub Talk. If you're enjoying the podcast, we'd love it if you could subscribe and also leave a short review. We're keen for this podcast to reach as many people in the Salesforce ecosystem as possible, and your reviews will help us do that.